Catching squares. All right, we have the 3 types today that I want to talk about. So let's kind of walk through each one. I'll probably spend more time on the grouping method today. I'll do 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 problems of it. But we have our 5 types of factoring. Now, you guys had the 2 types in the homework that was due today that you guys are just turning in. So the first type was on common factors. That is still something you want to try to do every single time. Common factors applies to any other type. So maybe you notice that something is in common, pick it up, then you can continue further. Number 2, we had trinomials. This is the one that you probably spent the most time on yesterday. Just trying to work out those last few problems. They're tricky. I mean, when you've got to break the front and the back number and it's got to make the middle, and you know, that's the part that really gets people, is like you got to figure out how to break it up and where to place the numbers. But those were the 2 that we had in the homework that was due today. Is there any questions on that particular assignment? Any problem in particular that you just didn't like, you didn't get? Okay, I think the only goofy question I had yesterday on that was somebody wrote down the problem card, and they were trying to factor it apart. And they're like, "Ward, I can't get 14 in the middle here." It was this one. It was like 14x, and it was plus 4. They're like, I can't get 14. So I'm like, well, then it's prime. And then they're like, I figured I could be able to do it. And then I looked at the book. They wrote down the problem wrong. This should have been 45. Well, now it's possible, because now you can break up the minus signs in both parentheses, because it's a minus minus. They're the same. They're both minus signs. And they break the 45 to be 9 and 5. And that'll make the 14 in the middle. Now, this problem was easy because you only had to use the back number. There were some tricky ones where you had to use the front and the back number to make. You had to use the front and the back number to make that the term in the middle. And so you had to think about that. You had to like FOIL it out and kind of break it up. That was the types of problems I was getting a lot of questions on yesterday throughout the day. So just if you're struggling with that, let me know. We can always practice. I don't have this all working like formula for that. I just know how to break up numbers, and then I just kind of plug them in and see if they work. So, even in Algebra 2, they had some magical way of doing it. It's just literally guessing and checking. You just kind of get the 3. But those are the methods we did yesterday. Now, the third type, this one I think we introduced Tuesday and Wednesday. I don't even know if we did an example of this yesterday. We might have. It was difference of squares. Difference of squares. This is that was that new type. We have not seen any of these in the homework yet. We will see them today. Okay, so we will have difference of squares in the assignment today. So I want to do at least 1 problem on that, so you know how to do it. You can remind yourself what to do if there's a bunch of letters and a bunch of variables everywhere. So I'll do 1 example of that. The 4th type that we kind of spent the last 2 days on was the cube rule. I'll do another one of those. I'll try to throw in a lot of different looks to that one, so you can just kind of see what to do. And then the last and 5th type, which we're going to spend probably the most time on today, I'll probably spend 2, maybe a 3rd problem. It depends on how much problems you need. This is grouping method. It is by far the most challenging because it's too open-ended. I can't predict what they're going to show you. All right, questions on any of the types so far? Okay, so the goal, I want to do 1 difference of squares. I want to do 1 cube rule, unless we need more. And then I'm going to try to do at least 2 grouping, maybe 3 if we need a 3rd. But that's what our goal is today. We are going to get an assignment today. It'll be due next week. I think I'm going to do it like next Tuesday, maybe. Give you a couple of days, 4 or 5 days to kind of work on it. But that's what I'm thinking for next week. We'll probably do some in-class activities next week. Next week is really, we're moving on. So like on Monday, we're going to move on to the next section. And we're going to really kind of figure out, like, why did I spend so much time on this? That's what we're going to figure out. Because we literally spent a week on factoring. We had to spend a solid week because the next sections use it. Like the next section in particular is really wickedly difficult. And then the section after that, we have to use it a lot. So I don't want this stuff to go away. I don't want it to be just one of those things like, hey, you did it today and I can forget about it until the test. Can't happen. You gotta know how to do it. All right, let's kind of walk through the problems here. Again, I want to do about 1 example of each of those last few, except for grouping. Maybe we'll do 2 or 3. We'll kind of see what you need. All right, so difference of squares. Now the square numbers, these should be in your notes somewhere, the squares, the perfect squares. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, 121, 144, 169, 196, and 225. Okay. I don't know, 60, let's see, that's 15, 16. Yeah, I don't really know past 225. No, 17 is 289. But I don't know 16. I have that on the top of my head. 256 maybe? 16 times 16? Anyway. Okay, these are the numbers you have to work with. These are the digits that you're allowed. So when we do a difference of squares, okay, these are the numbers they can pick from. So let's say they do 225 x to the 4th y squared minus, let's say, 36 y to the 8th. Do we agree that this is a difference of squares? It's got perfect square numbers, it's got a minus sign, the variables are evens, even variables for powers. Now, before I start, because I know a lot of you know the little shortcut for doing difference of squares, do they have anything in common? Do they have anything in common? A y squared. Yeah, they have a y squared. Both of them have at least two y's. I'm going to pull that out. I know that seems a little goofy. You should do this first. The reason why, it makes everything a little bit smaller. So I'm pulling two y's from each of them. So I pull the two y's in the front, two y's in the back, and so that's what I'm left with. It's still a difference of squares. The y squared, you're just going to leave it outside. If you don't do that first, it's not a big deal. It's just that it's not factored completely, where you get down to its simplest form. 225, it has a 15 in it, 15 times 15, and 36 is, what, 4 and 6, so there's no, let's see, I guess there would be possibly a 3 in 225, and there would actually be 9s, so I could pull out a 9 out of 225 and 36. If I divide this by 9, I think, so I can pull out a common factor of 9, this would be 15. No, 25 would be 25. And if I pulled out a 9 there, this would be a 4. So that's another good thing to check, is just check, even though it doesn't look like it, do they have any numbers common? I actually had a 9 in common. Okay, questions with how I factored so far? Okay, I don't think they have anything else in common, so let's do the difference of squares, still perfect squares. We can still do it the same way, we still do two parentheses. Two parentheses. I'm just going to leave the 9y squared out front. Don't really care about it, just forget about it. Okay, how do you break up the 25x to the 4th?
5x squared.
Yeah, 5x squared, 5x squared. Okay, 5x squared, 5x squared. You're breaking it up evenly, right? The numbers that multiply together, that gives you 25x to the 4th. When you multiply the variables together, x squared, it does give you x to the 4th because you have to add them together. Okay, now what are the symbols? Heard it?
Plus and minus.
Plus minus. I thought somebody said it. Maybe I just heard things. And what about 4y to the 6th?
2y to the 3rd.
2y to the 3rd. Yeah, 2y to the 3rd, 2y to the 3rd. Those will multiply together to give you 4y to the 6th. And that's your answer. As far as you go. Bless you. Bless you again. So there is your there's your difference of squares with a little bit of common factor kind of mixed in there. All right. Questions about difference of squares? Plus, minus, how to break up things. Remember, it's multiplying. Okay, good. Let's do a cube rule now. Let's do a cube rule. Let's put the cube numbers up here. Okay, so the cubic numbers. 1, 8, 27, let's see, 64, 125, 216, 343, 8 times 8 times 8. I think 8 times 8 times 8 is 512. Not sure, I'll have to multiply that in my head and figure that out here in a second. All right, but these are the numbers I can pick from. Remember, the variables have to be multiples of 3 when you do a cube rule. It can be a plus or a minus, doesn't matter. Difference of squares has to be subtraction, but a cube rule can be anything. So let's see, what's one that we could do? Let's go with like x to the third, y to the 15th, and let's go with a plus. Let's go with 343. Kind of keep it not easy, but keep it to a point where we don't need to pull any common factors here. Okay, do we agree it is a binomial? Okay, do we agree that they are multiples of 3's from variables? Okay, are all the digits cube numbers? Yeah, 1 and 343. So it is a cube rule. It does meet all the standards of it. Now, what's the rule? What do we do? What are the parentheses? What do they look like? Say it again? Yeah, binomial small, and then trinomial big. Okay, good. Now that we know it's small and big, right? Binomial, trinomial. The symbol in the first one. Symbol that goes here. Same. It's got to be the one that stays, right? The plus sign. It stayed. Whatever's in your problem has to stay. It has to be the same, right? Now we need to get that first binomial correct. If you can get the binomial in the front correct, it's golden after that. That's all you have to make sure. The one in the front is the most important thing. So what we have to do is take the cube root of each of these items. So cube root of this mess here. When you do this, I just divide the powers by 3's because they had to be multiples of 3. So what's x to the third divided by 3? X. Okay, and what is y to the 15th divided by 3? Y to the fifth. Yeah. You have to divide them by 3. Okay, does that make sense? So it's x to the first, y to the fifth. You divide it both by 3. What about the 343? The 7th number down my list, so it's the cube root of 343 is 7, which is how I think of it. Okay. Questions on how I did that so quick? 7 times 7 times 7 is 343, so it's the cube root of it. All right. Now we have to break up the parentheses in the back. So parentheses in the back. What are my symbols? Minus. And then?
Always positive.
Always a positive. So the next symbol that you do has to be the opposite of the one in the front. So that's why it had to be a minus. And then the one back is always positive. That's what the little acronym SOAP stands for. Same, opposite, always positive. Okay, so now, why is said that first parenthesis so important, that little binomial? It's because that binomial tells me what goes in the back parenthesis. So how I do this, I square the first item. So if I put this item and I put powers of 2's on it, what would that turn into?
X squared y to the 10th.
Yeah, x squared, y to the 10th. Right? I squared it. Squared both of them. Even if there's a number there, I square the number. Okay, the back item, the 7, square that. 49. That's going to go here. That's 7 times 7, right? 7 squared. Okay, do we understand the front and back? The middle, it's just the two items here and here multiply together and you ignore the sign in the middle of them. I don't even care if it's a plus or minus sign because we already have the symbols figured out. So 7 times an x y to the 5th. Well, that's 7x y to the 5th, right? That's just how you multiply. You can't really do anything. And that's your answer. That's as far as you can go. All right. Questions? Cube rule. Okay, last one, grouping. This one we're going to spend the most time on today. I think difference of squares, you're going to have, I think 5 of those in the homework. Cube, you have 4. And then these last ones, you have, I think, 4 or 5 maybe. You have on those, the grouping. Okay, so let's go right to the difference of squares. I'm just going to pull one that I saw in the textbook that I kind of liked. Just going to go with what I saw. Again, if you have any questions, don't be afraid. Fire it out there. Talk about it. Throw some new problems up. All right, so let's go to this first one here. It was something like, what a squared plus 32 minus, it was like 4, it was 4a squared, no, it was, what was it, it was 4a, I think it was 4a minus 8, I think. I think the 32 had an A on it. Oh, it had to be cube A, and then yeah, it had to be this. I think that's what I saw. Yeah, okay, I think this is it. This is the correct one. Okay, now, the reason why I bring this one up. Okay, you group things, right? Things out, you look at them. And the problem, when I saw this one was, and it was real subtle, they all shared something. Like, what do every number up there share? 4. You should pull that out first. It'll make the numbers a lot smaller. I think this is the exact problem. So I'm going to divide everything by 4. So if I divide everything by 4, I have a 4a to the third plus 8a squared minus a minus 2. And if you want to put like a 1a, that's fine, you can do that. Okay, so that was the trick in the beginning. Like, some people wouldn't see that. They'd skip over that, they'd glance over it. Now, the next thing that you have to do is you have to group. You have to push things together. So when I push things together, like what I noticed was, like I noticed these two in the front, they have a lot of A's, they had 4s in them. I'm going to group those two. The ones in the back, they don't really have much, they have the minus sign. They have the negative sign. So I'm going to group those two together. That was just the way that I did this. That's the way that I saw it in my head. Okay? So in the front, so I'm going to ignore this 4 out front. I don't really care about that. So you just can ignore that completely. Okay? What do these two things have in common?
4a squared.
4 and an a squared. Does everyone see that? That's what those two have in common. So I'm going to pull that outside of a parenthesis for just these two things. So if I divide a 4a squared out, what's going to be left here is an a, the plus sign, and then when I take out a 4a squared here, that's a 2. Like, that's what I get when I divide that 4a squared out. Does that make sense? The item in the parenthesis has to be the same size as the thing you started with. So it was a binomial and a binomial, right? All right, now the item in the back here. What do these have in common? A -1, like a negative sign, right? A negative. So I'm going to take out a -1. Well, when I divide a negative out, I'm left with a positive a and a positive 2, because that's how you divide by -1. So far, so good? Okay. Then it goes further, right? So then this is the part of the grouping problem. Like, right, you group two things together, you group two things together, and it should go the one extra step. So I'm going to leave that 4 up front. Really don't care about it. It's just kind of sitting there. But inside this parenthesis, I'm comparing this item and that item. The front and the back. The black and the green. What do they both share? A plus 2. And this is something that was really like your, I think it was problem number 8, I think, on that first part of that page 65. You had a problem that looked like this, where you had to like look at it right away and see what they had in common. They had an A plus 2. So when I pull the A plus 2 from both of these items, what's left here is the items that were attached to the A plus 2s. The 4a squared and the -1. Questions so far?
Do you leave the big parentheses on the end?
Yeah, so I just leave the big parentheses out there because the 4 is still out front. Now you don't have to. Like, you could just get rid of those parentheses and just push the 4 out, right? So yeah, let me get rid of this whole list here. We don't need this list. It's silly. Everybody knows the list. So yeah, so you could just write it like this. 4a squared minus 1, a plus 2. Okay. Questions up to this point, what grouping is. What you just did there, other than the 4 out front, that right there was grouping. You want to get to a point like that. Now, probably know something. What's your next question?
So, whenever you're done with grouping and factoring, is it as soon as you get like 2 pairs?
Yeah.
At the end?
Yeah, it's usually like 2 binomials side by side. Yeah, that's how you kind of know when you're close to being done. Yeah. I said close, because we're not. What do you notice in one of those parentheses?
They both have A's.
Well, yeah. No, I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about the A's, because they're not, it's not like they all have A's, so. What about that parenthesis? Just this one in particular. Just focus your eyes on that. What do you notice?
It's 4a squared plus 1.
Yes, I agree. That's 4a squared minus 1. Good observation. Okay.
Oh, difference in squares.
It's a difference of squares.
Oh, you're kidding.
It goes further.
I don't want to go
Because
further.
you have to be able to spot it. It is a binomial, so that's why I was agreeing. It is 4a squared minus 1. It's a binomial. It's got a minus sign, and they're all perfect squares and even numbers. So that part can go further. And I'm just going to leave this a plus 2 back here. Because difference of square rule, right? This thing goes to a difference of squares. You have to be able to recognize if something were to go further. You have to know, like, oh man, that's a cube rule. So I have to go further with just that parenthesis. So this is a plus minus, because that's how difference of squares work. How do you break up a 4a squared?
4a, or 2a.
2a and 2a. How do you break up a 1? 1 and 1. Done. Now you're finished. That's why I picked that one up as a textbook. Because it went further. It was something like, you didn't, like at first you don't see it. You can see they had 4s in common, but when you get going, it was like, oh my goodness, it came out to be a difference of squares anyway. It's one of those things, I brought this problem up and for a reason, is just that once you get to one or two of these rules, sometimes they start blending together and you have to go further, and that's what it's called factoring completely. It happens once in a while, but I just like that problem when I saw it. Okay, now I'm going to pick another one out of your textbook. There was one in particular, it had a bunch of letters on it. I just liked the look of it. All right. Okay. Give me number 88 if you can.
I knew
Just
he was
that
gonna pick
one.
that one.
88?
Yeah, 88 down there. Okay, so, does anyone still need this one then?
Nope.
Everyone's got it? Okay, I want number 88. This is the other one that I saw in the textbook. I couldn't memorize this one. There's too many letters going on and too many things all over the place. It was just kind of random when I first looked at it. Read it off. What do you got?
16a squared x
Okay,
minus 25y
okay.
minus 25x plus 16a squared y.
Yeah. Yeah, it's ugly. Gross.
I knew you were gonna pick that one.
Okay,
I was looking at the
You're
book
looking
too,
at
and I like there's a lot of numbers.
Yeah, a lot of numbers, lots of letters. I couldn't memorize this one. There's too many things going on. All right. Yes.
Can you group the first two sets and make them a difference of squares?
Yes, you could do that. Now, I wouldn't, because you have a single x and a single y. It's really not a difference of squares. It's close, really close, because the x and the y throw it off. Could do it, don't want to. What should you do though? Close. I like the idea. If the x and y weren't there, I would have done that.
Should you group the middle two and the outside two?
Yes. And here's the tough part about this one. This is why I liked it when I first saw it. Not just because there's lots of things everywhere. You have to mix and match. It's not like the other one I gave you where it's just like, oh, they just fell. It's like you just do the first two and the back two. You don't even have to move them. This one you have to move them. And you have to think about how you're moving them. Like, I'm going to group the front and back like you said. So I'm going to just push them together. I'm going to push the 16a squared x and the 16a squared y. I want to move them. This is commutative, right? You can move things around. But how do you group up the middle terms? What order should I write it?
Negative 25x first.
Yes, why?
Because there's an x in the first. Yeah.
Starting to think long term. I'm going to group those, the front and back, 16s and the, right, 16. But since I put the x first, when I do the next two that I'm grouping, I want the x to be first. Because exactly that reason. I need to compare this one and that one. At some point, they need to look the same. So I might have to rearrange things and think about it before I move on. That is super tough for people to spot. It's a long-term thing that I need to make sure the letters are in the right order. Even though I'm grouping those two and these two, I still have to compare them at some point. So I need to get the letters in the right order. That was good. Good vision on that one. Next, what do you think?
Just common factor.
Yeah, just common factor now. Now it's just common factor. There's not difference of squares anymore because that's not a plus or minus sign. Or not a minus sign. And that's not a difference of squares because it has an x and a y on it. It was close, but they weren't perfect squares. So just common factors. So in the front, what do they have in common?
16a squared.
Yeah, 16a squared. I'm just going to pull that out and write what's left when I pull the 16a squared out. Well, that was an x plus y. In the back,
Negative 25.
negative 25, and that's an x plus y, because I'm dividing out the negative sign. Because I divide them both by negative 25, so there's a 1 and a 1, positives. Okay, I'm going to stop there just for a second. Questions? Okay, now we're to the point where we kind of see the front and the back. What do they both share? X plus y. Perfect. So they have the x plus y in the back. I'm gonna leave it back there. It's like I'm ripping the x plus y off of both of those things. What was left if the x plus y's disappeared?
16a squared.
Yep. 16a squared minus 25.
Difference of squares.
Difference of squares. Not finished. Now this doesn't happen very often. I picked the problem because I liked it. Usually you can be done there. That's a typical grouping. What the math you just did there is a traditional grouping. You move things together. You might have to rearrange sometimes, depending on how you saw it. And then once you have those, then you try to go further if you can. Okay, well, in this case, this one goes one step further because of the stupid difference of squares. So that front parenthesis has to break up into 2, and the x plus y in the back is just going to hang out. It's not going anywhere. So it's going to be a plus minus sign. Break up the 25 to be 5 and 5. Break up the 16 to be 4a and 4a. And now you're done. Now, was that the only way I could have done the problem?
No.
No. Because grouping is very open-ended. You could have done it completely different than me and still manage to get to the final result. Because instead of grouping the front and back item, because you notice the 16s, you could have been the person that grouped the 16a squared and the 25x together. Because you might be the person that looks at variables instead. You looked at x's. So I'm going to go group the x's together. And you could do it that way. And you would still get down to the same step that I did. So, now if you want, I'll go through that step. I can show you what you'd look like if you just did x's instead of the 16s or the 25s. But you would have gotten down to the same answer, just been a different organization to it. Questions? Now, would you like another one? No, okay, so here's your homework today.
I'm all good.
I know, sorry. Guys, we're all starting to glaze over, sorry, it's kind of tough. Okay, I'm gonna put the homework here. This assignment is due on Tuesday, a couple days. You have the rest of the time today to work. I'll give you some time on Monday as well. Monday, we're moving on to the next section, so I'm gonna intro the next section on you on Monday. Just intro, a light introduction today. So it's page 65 still. I know it seems weird. You're still on the same page 65. You're doing 40 through 48 evens. Those should be difference of squares. Then you're going to go to 57 through 63 odds. So that way you can check those in the back. That's nice because it's sometimes nice to see if you're doing those are cube rules. Then the grouping 71, 72. 85 through 87. We just did 88 there. So. those are all on those last. Okay, so there's different squares, cube grouping. And I tried to pick like 5, picked 4, and then I picked 5, so it's about 13 questions again. 13 and 14, I guess. Okay, there you go. Remember, at some point